Hello, hello. How are we doing? So I see that there's a viewer. Why don't we say hello in the chat? I'm guessing if you're here, you know why I'm here. I'm here to prepare for the GMAT. I'm doing my study sessions live online for everybody to watch me and judge how poorly I do on a lot of questions. Um, so, so yeah, we'll give it a go. I've got a question on screen here, and I'll just get started. Yep, cool. All right, let's go. Equal parts. I mean, there's no E option, but all right. Well, thankfully, I started off with an easy one this time. Not like last session where I got the first question wrong and it was easy. Kind of embarrassing. But so if you saw my last session, you'll know that I'm just trying to. I've been focusing a little bit on mixture questions at the moment, just trying to make sure I get my head around how these mixture questions work, and so that I can have some practice with ratios and things like that. So this was another one, and to step through what I kind of just did very quickly. Read the question. So the ratio of alcohol and water in 3 mixtures of alcohol and water is, and so when I kind of read that, I mean, if you just look at that, the wording of that is a little bit awkward, but once you kind of read it and if you slow down, it kind of makes a little bit more sense. It's basically saying there's some combination of alcohol and water, and we've got 3 different combinations. So really these ratios, 3 to 2, 4 to 1, and 7 to 3, all they represent are the percentages of alcohol. Pull it up so I can, yeah, so I started writing here, A, B, and C. I just named the 3 mixes and just based off those ratios, what those percentages were. So 60%, 80%, and 70% alcohol. And I read the next part. So if equal quantities of the mixture are drawn and mixed, the concentration of alcohol in the resulting mix will be. And so that's basically saying, okay, well, these 3 different mixtures, the 60, 80, and 70, we're putting in equal parts of all 3. So what's going to be the ratio in the new mix? Now, if they weren't equal parts, this would be a little bit more complicated. But the fact that they were equal parts made it a lot simpler. So then I just had to look at, well, what's the average essentially of those 3 mixes? And so it will end up being 70% alcohol. So that was B, and looks like it was right. I'll just double check what the kind of official response says about it. Can be brought up to 10 for each mixture. Yeah, so this person basically did what I did, but they just took it up to 10 to work out the percentages a little bit more quickly. So I just sort of looked at 3 to 2 and kind of just realized that that was 60% because 3 out of 5 parts is 60%. Same with this one. Instead of taking this to 8 and 2, showing that it's 80%, I just sort of knew 4 out of 5 parts, so 4/5 is 80%. Then the last one was already in 10 parts, so the last one was 7 to 3, I think it said. So yeah. So I guess what they've written here in this last part is what I would have done if it wasn't as simple as it was. So mixing these three will give 6 plus 8 plus 7 equals 21 units of alcohol. And 4 plus 2 plus 3 equals 9 units of water. Yeah, so in a more complicated question where maybe the three aren't being mixed equally, then you would work out, well, what's the equivalent amount of each one that's going to be in there. And so getting them all to the same, getting all three of them to the same ratio, so out of 10 parts, for example, would be a lot more important then, because then we can compare them. So if this was 6, 4, 8, 2, and 7, 3, then, and let's say we had twice as much of A as we do of B and C, like say that was the question, then now all of a sudden, instead of 6 parts alcohol mixing with 4 parts and 3 parts, it's now going to be kind of 12 parts with 8 parts and 3 parts. And the total wouldn't be out of 30, it would be out of 40. So, I mean, that would just give us a different percentage in the end. So, yeah, I mean, good to see kind of what to do on harder ones. But yeah, I purposefully started with an easier one so that it so yeah, I think that's right. Probably should have done this with the even numbers. Actually, do you know what? I'll just do it with algebra really quick. 2 to 1. I just need to add 5 liters. Oh God, okay. Okay. So I just, I think I mentioned as well in my last stream that I learned the allegation method. And if you're familiar with that, it looks something like this. And then I was looking for chances to practice allegation. Well, that kind of led me to waste about 1.5 minutes on this question because my instinct was to look at this question and go, okay, how can I solve this with allegation? And I started kind of doing that, but then the numbers got messy. And I probably should have started with water as opposed to with milk. So in case you're not familiar with allegation, really quickly, the way that it works is if you've got, well, so in this example, we've got a liquid which is some mix of two things. And so I started out by saying, okay, the original mix of milk and water is 3 parts milk, 1 part water. So in other words, it's 75% milk. So we're starting with 75% milk, and we're adding just water. So we're adding 0% milk. And we want to get to a mixture that is 2/3 milk, so 66.6% milk. Now with allegation, you kind of just do this subtraction, cross-subtraction type thing, where you end up with, what I had before was about 8.3. 75 minus 66.6 is about 8.3. 66 minus 0 is 66. And it's technically 0.6 recurring. Actually, I should put that above, sorry. It's like that. Anyway. And then basically, with allegation, what that means is this is now the ratio of milk to water in the result. So, sorry, no. No, this is the ratio, of milk to water. Well, sorry, no. 66.6% is the ratio of milk to water. And then what we've got down here is how much, that's what it was. Yeah, so this ratio, 66.6 to 8.3, is the ratio of how much of the original there is compared to how much of the added one there is. So if there's 75 parts in total, then 8.3 parts will be just water. And yeah, so you can kind of tell those numbers are really messy, and it would be weird to try and figure that out. And so at that point, I was like, okay, well, I'm pretty sure there's just an easier way to do this with just kind of looking at the algebra. And in the end, I didn't even really need algebra because it was that simple. And so when I looked at it for even a second more, and just thought, okay, why don't I just work with the numbers we have? If we have the ratio, we know that the original mix was 40 liters. That means we have 30 liters of milk. So I wrote that. And if we have 30 liters of milk and we need to add just water to end up with 2 to 1, well, that means that how much water there is going to be half of how much milk there is. And so if there's 30 liters of milk, we're going to end up with 15 liters of water. And right now we have 10 liters of water, so we're just going to add 5 liters to make it 15. And so that's why I just I did kind of that in my head and just wrote 5 liters down, because that's how many liters of water you need to add. And then I was option C, and that was it. Looks like most people got that right. That part, I mean, I started doing that after 2 minutes already, so I was already over time. But then I did that part in about 30 seconds and came to it. And that's probably what it should have taken. This question should have taken 30 seconds. But I was so set on trying to do it with allegation that it kind of messed me up. I'm just going to look at that for a second to see if I could have used this to come, like, well, you know what? Let's go back to the original one. If I had just carried on with it, how much more work would it have taken to get to the solution? Because it's 66 2/3 divided by 8 1/3, essentially. Yeah. That's essentially the ratio that we're talking about here. And if I simplify that, we end up with 120, 198. So we have 200 over 3 divided by 25 over 3, which is equal to 200 over 3 multiplied by 3 over 25, which is equal to 600 divided by 75, which is equal to 150, 300, 600, 8. I think that should just be 8. 75, 150, 300, and 600. Yep. So if that's essentially 8 to 1, then we were adding 1/8 of the original being 40, 1/8 of 40, 5 liters. So I would have had to do a little bit of kind of maths with some fractions to get to the same answer, because yeah, it still would have been, we would have been 8 to 1 of the original to the new one. So we're adding essentially 1/8 of the original amount, 1 over 8 multiplied by 40 liters, yeah, equals 5 liters. And then that would have told me how many liters of water to add. I mean, that's still not super hard, but clearly harder than this. So the lesson here, I think, is I need to make sure that I don't get too caught up on one way of doing it. And if I need to take like 5 seconds at the start of the question to go, what is the best way to tackle this? Do that. Because that 5 seconds at the start would have saved me probably at least 60, maybe 80 seconds from this question. Because I solved it within 30 seconds once I switched. So 30 seconds for that, 15 seconds to read it, and I would have been done with more than a minute and a half. I'm going to do one of these kinds of questions, but a hard one. So let's see. By the way, shout out to GMAT Club. The way that you can just search questions like this is pretty awesome. All right, got that centered. Let's go. And just gonna move. Wonder if I can always. No, okay, it's all right. All right. Oh, the edge is cut off. There we go. All right, let's go. Oh, I don't actually have an answer for this one. Hopefully I can work it out. Yeah, no, I'm struggling. For anyone watching this wondering why I'm still going at 4 minutes, it's It's because I'm not really worried about the clock yet because I am so early in just building my theory. So I'm okay with kind of taking more time right now to learn how to solve these things. And then the second, third time, fourth time I see something like this, I would want to be hitting it in 2 minutes. But yeah, considering this is my first time really actually trying to solve a question like this. Like I say, I've seen a question like this before, but I haven't actually tried to solve it before. You know, at this point, I'm just gonna put a guess down. And wait, what is going on here? A, E, C, D, V? You serious? Is that B or is that? I mean, it's got to just be a typo, surely. Yeah, I'm gonna say B. I mean, we don't actually know the solution yet. But, well, we don't have an official solution yet. But let's see what some of the responses are. Final volume of A is that's kind of the obvious thing, isn't it? So if the ratio of A, so we know that at the start, A equals the total. All right. Yeah, we know at the start A is the total equals X liters. Let's say that. And then we also know that at the end of this whole 15 liter removal process, the end result will end up being in the ratio of 9:16, which means of the end, A will be 9 out of 25 total parts. So 9 over 25 is how much A will have. But 9 over 25 of the total volume, and the total volume is going to just be what? Like the original volume, which is X. So if we know that at the end, we'll have 9x divided by 25 of A, and that's after having removed 15 liters and 15 liters again, then we should be able to. Yeah, an easier way probably for me to think about it would have been, all right, let's go back to what we knew. We knew that we had some amount of A, and that equals the sort of total amount of the volume of the container itself. Now, we removed 15 liters twice and replaced with just B. Yeah, so we did that 2 times and replaced it with B. Now, and at the end, we ended up with 9 to 16, meaning that there was 9/25 left of A. Now, if that action of removing 15 liters twice, if that happened twice, sorry, and we end up with 9/25 of the original liquid, because we're not replacing it with any of the original, we're replacing it with B. So every time we remove, it's just however much, like in the first one, it's all just removing A, and in the second one, it's removing that same kind of ratio, but just of whatever was left of A. So looking at this, you can kind of see, well, 9/25, that's what's left. That's the same as 3/5 times 3/5. You know, and I did that in my algebra before, but I didn't really understand why I was doing that in my algebra. Why did I take the square root? Well, I took the square root to figure out how much is coming out, essentially. So we're taking out 3/5 in the first root, first lot, and then 3/5 of whatever was left. So, well, we're taking out 3/5. Well, actually, that doesn't quite work, does it? Because if you take out 3/5, then you've got 2/5 left of A. And now we take out 3/5 of the 2/5. Yeah, so, right. 9 out of 25 is what's left. So 9 over 25 is what's left. So 3 over 5 is what's left. We're removing 2/5. We're not removing 3/5. Right, right. Okay. So after we remove 15 liters, we're left with 3/5. And then after that, we're left with 3/5 of that. That's actually, yeah, that makes sense. And I think I could do that again, actually, relatively easily. So if there's 9/25 left after 2 removals, then that must mean that there were 3/5 left after each one, because that's the square root of that. And if this was if there was 3 removals, then it would be the cubed root. I mean, what would that be? Well, anyway, I'll just follow this train of thought to the end. Removal of 2/5 of A, the 15-liter reduction in A must constitute 2/5. Right, so 15 liters is 2/5. Then how much is the original? Yeah, that's easy enough. Multiply 75 divided by 2, 37.5. Okay, so that makes sense. So I'm going to move on and do a quick, I'm going to do some verbal, I'm going to do some sentence correction as a little bit of a palate cleanser after all of that. Start with a couple of easy ones. All right. This is apparently an easy one, but it looks quite long. Can I get the whole question in frame? I'll have to zoom out a little. All right. All right, so if I'm there, okay. So I'm going to stop the timer and then scroll down for you. There we go. Okay, so I don't think it's E. It's not going to be D. No, it's going to be B. I'm going to say C. Okay, so surprisingly, only 6% of people said A, and I thought it was quite close between the two, but maybe there was some rule that shows that it's clearly not A. But I mean, if I step through my logic really quickly, I'll then have a look at kind of what the pros said. But for me, it was between A and C, and I mean, A was the third highest responded. 7% said E, but almost everybody got it right. So, rejecting its argument that the Masters Dog Training Club's primary aim was to teach people to train dogs, the court ruled the club ineligible for tax exemption as an educational group. So, just understanding the meaning that they're trying to convey in this sentence, essentially what I'm hearing there is, so the court ruled them not eligible for a tax exemption, and then the reason they did that was they did not believe that the club's primary aim was teaching people to train dogs. Now, I then kind of scanned through all the answer responses to sort of see what was different between them, and I kind of, first things I noticed was they all started differently. There's rejecting its argument, rejecting the argument. In rejecting, the club was not to be, the court ruled. And then after that, I started just kind of ruling them out one by one, and I sort of started from the bottom. And so I started with E, and the reason I ruled out E was when I read this, so the court ruled the Masters Dog Training Club not eligible to be exempted from taxes as an educational group. Just that is so clunky and not really correct English, I think. Specifically, so the court ruled the Masters Dog Training Club not eligible. So that should say ineligible, for one. You would say something like they are not eligible, but to say the court ruled them not eligible, that doesn't quite work. You'd have to say the court ruled them ineligible, or ruled them to be ineligible, actually. And then to be exempted from taxes is also awkward and kind of not really the way you would normally say that. I think that's just idiomatic. The court ruled them not to be exempt, something like that. Or to be ineligible for exemption would be more appropriate. Or for an exemption. Anyway, rejecting the argument that the primary aim. Yeah, and that's the other thing, the primary aim. I believe this is an improper possessive. So this should say their primary aim, referring to the primary aim of the Masters Dog Training Club. So the court ruled the Masters Dog Training Club, blah, 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 rejecting the argument that their primary aim was to teach people to train dogs. The primary aim is ambiguous. Like, what primary aim? Like, of who? From where? Like, what are you talking about? So that one was out. D, I ruled that out because the club was not to be exempted of taxes as an educational group. So you again, it's idiomatic, and I think it's idiomatic with the word exempt. You're not exempted of taxes. You can get an exemption from taxes. So the club was not to be exempted from paying taxes as an educational group. Yeah, so that's idiomatically incorrect, I think. Exempted of taxes doesn't make sense. It's like they're using the word exempted in the same way that you might say, like freed from the burden of, or something like that. I can't even think of a easier way to say that. So the club was not to be exempted of taxes as an educational group, ruled the court by rejecting its argument that the primary... Yeah, that's the other thing. The court doesn't rule something by rejecting an argument. It rules something because it rejected an argument. So the meaning here has actually gone, like, rejecting the argument is not the method in the courtroom that the court uses to make rulings. So yeah, so this didn't make logical sense, and so I kind of ruled it out based on that right there. Then I went up to C. I didn't rule it out because it looked like it worked to me. Rejecting the argument that the primary aim of the Masters Dog Training Club was to teach people to train dogs. The court ruled that the club was ineligible for exemption from taxes, which is what we would want to say. Like I mentioned, the idiomatic error down here. So the club was ineligible for exemption from taxes as an educational group. So this is the main part of the sentence. The court ruled that the club was ineligible for exemption from taxes. I probably should say for an exemption from taxes as an educational group. Then all of this is a modifier. So how did they go about making this ruling? They did it rejecting the argument that the primary aim of the Masters Dog Training Club was to teach people to train dogs. Now, I didn't rule it out because that looked like it was fine, and then I ended up umming and ahhing over A and C because those two are very, very similar. So the next thing I did was I ruled out B to make sure that it was just between A and C. And so in rejecting the Masters Dog Training Club's argument that their primary aim was to teach people to train dogs, the court ruled the club ineligible. And so if you do the slash and burn kind of thing that I guess I think Magoosh talk about in their YouTube videos, you can just cut down the modifiers to get to the main part of the sentence, and that's saying, in rejecting the argument, the court ruled the club ineligible to be exempted of taxes as an educational group. Well, again, exempted of taxes, idiomatically incorrect, but bigger than that, in rejecting the argument, the court ruled the club ineligible. So you don't rule something in rejecting it, in rejecting something else. Like, again, it's like because they rejected the argument, the court ruled the club ineligible. So yeah, what this is saying, when you say in rejecting the argument, the court ruled the club ineligible, what that implies, like the meaning that actually has, is that when they reject the argument, that was what created the ineligibility. That's what created the ruling. So it changes the meaning, because what they're saying is, okay, we reject your argument, and like the ruling has now been made. Whereas a more accurate way would be, like a more accurate statement would be something like, in accepting the in accepting some filing or something like that, like whatever the procedure is to make a ruling, in going through that procedure, the court ruled the club ineligible. So rejecting the argument is just the step that leads to them making the ruling, but it's not the process or the procedure that they use to make the ruling. So in rejecting it implies that this is the process for making rulings, when that was just the reasoning behind the ruling. So yeah, that was a long-winded way of saying that's why I ruled out B. And so then I came back to just A versus C, and A versus C has two differences: rejecting its argument and rejecting the argument. So rejecting its argument that the Masters Dog Training Club's primary aim was to teach people to train dogs, the court ruled the club ineligible for tax exemption as an educational group. And then the second big difference is for tax exemption as versus for exemption from taxes as. And I already said that in my mind, idiomatically, exemption from taxes is more correct. And this would have to have the word a or a here. The court ruled the club ineligible for a tax exemption as an educational group. Without the word a, for tax exemption is not really a complete sentence. So rejecting its argument that the Masters Dog Training Club's primary aim was to teach people to train dogs. And the other thing was just trying to split it at this first part. It was hard because I kind of thought its argument that the Masters Dog Training Club's primary aim, I kind of thought that that made sense. It's the club's argument. So rejecting the club's argument, so it's referring to the club. So rejecting the club's argument that their aim was to teach people to train dogs. Now, I think maybe the problem is that the word its is coming before we actually have the noun. So we're saying, so we don't, so when at the time we read it, when we say rejecting its argument, whose argument? We don't know yet. You have to keep reading to get there. And even though it's very soon, that's probably the problem, I think. And so when I read rejecting the argument that the primary aim of the Masters Dog Training Club was to teach people to train dogs, like when you read that, you go, okay, rejecting the argument that, well, we know that, like, what argument? Well, the one that we're about to say. So rejecting the argument that this, the court ruled that the club was ineligible for exemption from taxes. And even that should say for an exemption from taxes, I think. Or it was ineligible for tax exemption status or something like that, tax exempt status. But anyway, the idioms get a little bit messy there, but I think that kind of makes sense. So I'll just quickly check what the others said and then get ready to go to bed. Problem in the original statement is that of modifier. Rejecting its argument was to teach people to train dogs is participle. That should be modifying the word immediately after that. But here, court rejecting its argument is illogical. Missing that after ruled. Okay, let's see. So they're saying that rejecting is a participle, meaning that it needs to be referring to the first noun after that. It's not first word, but anyway. So rejecting its argument. The court. So the court did what? Rejecting. I mean, I don't actually think that's a problem. Because even though this is really long, I think this is all still like, okay, to teach people to train dogs. That is, infinitive, but it's essentially a noun, which is essentially describing what the primary aim was. The primary aim was this, to teach people to train dogs. And the primary aim is describing the argument, because the argument is that this club's primary aim was to do this. So rejecting its argument, the court ruled the club ineligible. I mean, I still think its is a potential issue with not coming before the actual noun itself, but I don't think this participle is the problem, because this participle, this all kind of becomes like one big phrase. As in after its, this is all essentially one big noun phrase in a way, because it's like rejecting its argument that blah, 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 is all just talking about the argument. So rejecting its argument, the court ruled the club ineligible. That sentence would be fine. So I don't think that the participle is the problem. Because what they're essentially saying is the participle, immediately after the participle, we should have the noun of the subject. So like whoever is doing the rejecting. And they're kind of saying, well, there's Master's Dog Training Club here, there's dogs, there's like these different nouns between the participle and the subject, which is the court being the one doing the ruling. But the thing is, these nouns are, what do you call them? Apositives. So, well, so I mean, they're like noun phrases that are just describing the argument. Yeah, anyway. Pronoun error in rejecting the Master's Dog Training Club's argument that their primary aim. Yeah, I think that's what I said, isn't it? In rejecting the Master's Club, this would have to be its primary aim. Oh, actually, I didn't say that. What did I say? I said in rejecting was the problem. But in rejecting the club's argument that its primary aim was to teach people to train dogs. Yeah, well, that's true as well. That's a more clear mistake than the one I picked up. I still think that's a mistake, but anyway. This XC is correct, so let's come back. Poorly structured. Ruled as a past participle should be modifying the previous clause. Pronoun ambiguous in ruled the court by rejecting its argument. Pronoun ambiguous in ruled the court by rejecting its argument. Yeah, I mean, that sentence just doesn't really make a lot of sense. I guess that's what it all comes down to. The court ruled that the Master's Dog Training Club was ineligible to be exempted from taxes and educational group. So exempt from versus exempt of. So this person is basically breaking it up into like how the answers were split and like which ones were which side of the split was correct or versus not. And so the second one is one I picked up on. So exempt from versus exempt of. Exempt from is the correct idiom. So B and D were out. And yep, that's fine. And that's what I ruled those out. Ruled the club versus ruled that the club. Ruled that the club is the correct idiom. A, B, D, and E are out. I mean, I don't think that's quite right. I mean, they're saying that it must be ruled that as opposed to just ruled the. But it would be grammatically correct, I think. So if I pick one, they said everything except C was out because of this. So let's just pick one. So the club was not to be exempted of, no, that's a terrible option. The court ruled that the Master's Dog Training Club not eligible to be exempted. Now that doesn't even make sense. But say we adjusted it to make it work. The court ruled that the Master's Dog Training Club was ineligible to be exempted from taxes as an educational group. It doesn't have to be the court ruled that. It can be the court ruled the Master's Dog Training Club. The court ruled the Master's Dog Training Club to be ineligible. The ruling was they are ineligible. So the court ruled, because if you said the court ruled that the Master's Dog Training Club to be ineligible, wouldn't make sense. But the court ruled the Master's Dog Training Club to be ineligible. That does make sense. And so I think this is not actually a split, because that can be right, but so can that. So that's a poor split. Third split, pronouns with unknown antecedent. A, B, D out. Rejecting its argument. Oh, so that is, I guess, the proper way of saying what I said, which is when you have a pronoun, it's, but it comes before the actual noun itself, so you don't actually know what it's talking about. Rejecting its argument, like whose argument? We don't know yet. So rejecting its argument in A, it has no proper pronoun to refer to yet. That their primary in B, there has no proper antecedent to refer to. And rejecting its argument in D, its has no proper noun to refer to. Yeah, okay. I mean, I think I agree with that split as well. And I'm just going to stop there. So thank you to my viewer that stuck with me this whole time. I do appreciate. Yeah, I hope that was useful for you. Thank you again for joining me, and all the best. And I mean, feel free next time to join me in the chat, and you can tell me to hurry it up, or whatever the case may be, and I'll do my best to kind of accommodate.